They misunderstood peace when they called those 10 years of silence a blessing. Silence was never absence, only a veil draped over something that still breathed, patient and waiting. For a decade, the village learned to speak softly at dusk, to close doors like eyelids shutting against a familiar shadow, to tell children stories where the void was only a metaphor for restless nights. Time, they said, heals, but some wounds are fed by time. The first sign that the wound was alive again did not come as a scream or a storm. It came as a thread of cold air, weaving through the alleys, carrying one word that no one dared repeat. A whisper without an owner, yet with direction, and all, without looking at one another, understood. The void remembered the way back. On the edge of the desert, where the earth cracked like dry lips and the horizon weighed like a secret poorly kept, old fissures lit up once more. Not suddenly, not like lightning, but like embers coaxed to life by the breath of something ancient. The ground pulsed with a rhythm not of stone, but of flesh, the heartbeat of a world that should never touch our own. In that place where hardened sand hides footsteps that lead nowhere, the air thickened into a deep violet, as if night itself had grown jealous of too many dawns. And from the seams of stone and silence, two burning lights emerged, first faint, then undeniable, establishing a gaze no human lantern could ever mimic. Those eyes did not come seeking, they came remembering. 10 years before, when the desert swallowed a girl named Kaisa, some believed the void collected souls as trophies. Others, pragmatic, called it a clean death, swallowed by a fault, consumed by gases, gone without ceremony. But those who had truly known her knew otherwise. The void is no grave, it is a womb. Nothing enters without returning. And what returns bears the mark of an alien kingdom, burned into flesh and memory. To cope, the villagers built explanations like walls. They called a wound a legend, called waiting the work of time. Only the very old still heard the cracking rock at night, the tremors beneath the sand, the faint rumble of a breath that was not the wind. For them, the void had a voice, low, steady, tuning fear like a stringed instrument. The decade had been merciful on the surface. Crops thrived, caravans reopened, laughter returned to markets. Yet at the edge of the map, where cartography dissolves into question marks, bones of nameless creatures began to appear. Beings found at dawn beneath clear skies, their translucent fibers still trembling, as if homesick for another side. Scholars spoke of uncatalogued fauna, the cautious spoke of omens. And it was this collection of signs that made that night's whisper unbearably heavy. Because stories were ripe, because the village, though it denied, had always known. Every return begins with a call. The voice that was not a voice slid through courtyards, climbed rooftops, entered homes with the familiarity of air. It did not want to be heard. It wanted to be recognized. Each listener felt a different chill. Some remembered old deaths, others broken promises, and some only felt seen by something that should have no eyes. And yet, two burning points in the west proved otherwise. There were eyes. There was a presence choosing where to gaze. The desert was no longer scenery, it was a road. She emerged from the place no one dared decide if it was frontier or womb. The suit around her did not look worn, but alive, adjusting to heat and cold, expanding and retracting, glowing not like a lantern, but like a symptom. Deep violets clashed with starless blacks. Filaments pulsed against her skin like vigilant breath. On her shoulders, living cannons hummed, tuning themselves before a forbidden symphony. There were no scars, because the void does not leave scars. It rewrites flesh until pain itself becomes architecture. Each step she took did not merely disturb sand. It bent the horizon, as if reality itself had to shift its posture to receive her. The village did not scream. They did not run. They did not pray. Not outwardly. They had learned that noise invites what shadows wish to hide. They stood frozen, statues choosing between stone and motion. Within each chest, a private war. The urge to call loved ones inside, the urge to call nothing at all, the urge to become dust obedient to the wind. The silence that fell was not ordinary silence. It had weight, layers, a center. For every true silence orbits a name, and this name had been absent for far too long. The void is not mere absence. It is language. It speaks in patterns the eyes reject and the ears deny, teaching through hunger and repetition. For 10 years, Kajsa had learned this grammar of survival, carving a new word into every heartbeat of her living armor, a phrase into each escape, a paragraph into every wound that tried to consume her. She had learned maps that redraw themselves, shelters that lie, boundaries that bite. Above all, she learned to listen to what cannot scream, for in the void, even pleas for help sound like threats. Her return was not escape, it was translation. The lexicon of another world now burned within her eyes. When the cannons on her shoulders vibrated with a tone the village had never heard, it was not a threat, but a breath. Their glow was not wrath, but a bridge. A pulse of energy rippled out, not to destroy, but to measure. Like a hand on a fevered brow, it tested the world. Lamps flickered, casting shadows taller than their owners. The void, recognizing recognition, shifted, because everything conscious longs for reciprocity. And in that moment it knew its daughter or its emissary had been received. The story of a girl who fell and returned is never one person's story. It is the story of the place that swallowed her. Deserts, like old seas, remember flow. They let go only to receive again. The village had learned a decade of prudence. Walk in pairs, carve markers into stone, never follow lights that bloom from holes. Kajsa had learned a decade of survival, to say no where every nerve wanted to surrender. Now, these lessons would converge, not as clash, but as stitch. The first signs of stitching appeared as fissures exhaled forms without bodies, outlines of hunger, tendrils of curiosity that sniffed but did not touch. Her suit flared like an animal recognizing both predator and kin. It inflated, drew lines of warning in light and heat, answered in a dialect older than imagination. This dialogue, invisible to most, was not persuasion but boundaries. For the void treats limits as proposals, firm ones teach, weak ones invite teeth. Her return promised no safety, only clarity. The world does not return to what it was once someone crosses the abyss and comes back burning. What they called normal had always been an agreement, and agreements survive only when renewed. From that night onward, their days would include the counting of pulses from the west, the measure of shadows cast by dunes, the morning heat of ancient stones. They had not asked for a new astronomy, yet they had one now. Kajsa did not ask for altars. She did not demand memory. She did not want to be queen of a scar. She came to fulfill what the void paradoxically taught her, to protect by delimiting, to guard by holding distance, to translate by refusing surrender. Her presence, more than words, taught the village to move with doubled attention, to read danger in small dissonances, dust spiraling the wrong way, water that takes too long to boil, stones that return a cold climbing the arm like ambition. It was no mysticism, it was practice, and practices endure. Some forces came from afar, eager to turn her return into spectacle. They brought maps and cameras, theories and jars, thinking they could own by naming. But what they found were not walls, but something stronger, tedium. For the void despises the obvious. What they witnessed were long hours of wind, a violet shimmer breathing like a mountain, a silent figure keeping measure. They left saying, nothing happens when you watch too closely. And so, unknowingly, they helped preserve the pact. For the void tolerates curiosity, but loathes audience. In time, the village relearned to speak of what mattered without pretending to know what it meant. Children, unburdened by adult comforts, understood with savage ease. They drew dunes with eyes and made songs to keep pace with the wind. They would grow into a courage not of reckless advance, but of patient endurance. And endurance is the form of courage that saves. But one night, the pact was tested. The horizon quivered like fevered skin, and the low note they had accepted was replaced with a jagged chord full of teeth. This was no visit, it was an advance. The air tasted metallic, like storms that bring no rain. The ground, usually restrained, begged to remind them it too could bite. The village obeyed the pact. No panic, only retreat into silence. On the western edge, her cannons lit not in warning, but in purpose. What they released was not a beam, but a prayer, a dense ribbon of light structured by frequencies that unmake instead of harm, a wall that strips intention rather than flesh. The form that rose against it was too precise to draw. Not ugly, ugliness is a human comfort, but correct beyond mercy. Angles decided by a math that had no room for compassion. At the touch of her light, it unraveled, not in explosion, but in resignation, as if realizing it had arrived too soon. The night exhaled again. Inside their houses, the villagers heard the hardest sound of all. Nothing happening, because something unseen had worked. That is the nature of protection, invisible on the day it matters most. From that night, the pact thickened. The void learned there were limits it should not test under stars. The village learned that too much gratitude is a kind of disturbance and kept its rhythm. Kaisa, whose name could now be spoken without heavy air, became the silent verb of the frontier. She did not call herself a hero, nor permit herself to be a victim. She simply was, and being is an act. Each dawn, the sun invented new ways to rest on her living armor. Each dusk, violet and black lay together like companions sharing the same hunger. Between those habits, life grew sober but steady, and as long stories demand, there was no easy epilogue. Some asked if she would remain forever, if every trip to the market would always be shadowed by a horizon that breathed. Others asked if the darkness, once appeased, would retreat forever, like water finding its bed. But there are no such answers in the grammar of great encounters. The void is not a problem to be solved. It is a presence to be negotiated. As long as the world has edges, there will be conversations between what stays and what comes. And as long as there is one who can walk between those conversations without losing her name, there will be space for fear to choose the shape of courage. Sometimes at dusk, when shadows stretch politely and the wind remembers to keep rhythm, a child will ask with their eyes, "Why did she come back?" The answer does not fit into words because it does not fit into will. The void did not return her. She chose the way back. She brought with her a language we lacked, and with it the chance that our side of the story might not be only the record of suffering, but also of what we learned to prevent. The whisper that once froze the village is now a reminder, not a threat. It reminds them that silence is not emptiness, but pact. That absence is not death, but invisible work. That peace, if it exists, is the twin of vigilance. 10 years gone, one return, a life rewritten between two worlds. They call her daughter of the void, and they are not wrong so long as they remember to be born of something is not to obey it. Some children return with the language of foreign lands, not to impose it as law, but to keep ignorance from killing love a second time. The village, once frozen in fear, has learned to listen, and what is listened to changes the sound of what is said. When night truly chooses to be night, starless, moonless, thick as breath held too long, from the rooftops, two faint lights can be seen in the west. They do not accuse, nor ask, nor console. They simply are. And in that being lies a promise unspoken. As long as there is a border, there will be someone who knows how to hear it. The world that once trembled in fear has learned at last to tremble in respect. And in that respect, there is future.